Hold on, do it. Yeah.
Shots fired. Woo! Back to the future. Whoa. Catching air like I hit a floated Buddha. Whoa. Move chick out the way like I'm Luda.
You failed at your resolutions, and we totally knew that was going to happen.
Well, no shit.
So this is a graph which shows our interest in New Year's resolutions from the beginning of December to the end of January last year. And it's pretty much the same every year, with a great big peak at the 1st of January. But it's round about this time of year where we start to break our resolutions.
Did you know that?
Okay, so people are hilariously optimistic about keeping their New Year's resolutions. But at the end of the day, for every 100 people who make them, ultimately, only 9% of people are going to keep them.
Now you know.
Evidence suggests that within a week, 25% of us have failed on our resolutions. A month later, half of us have. And then you've got those annoyingly persistent 25 or 30% that seem to carry it on for years. And we've been doing this research for decades. And the big revolution we have now is people tend to do what they enjoy and not what they don't enjoy. You're welcome for decades of research for something as simple as that.
Back to the future. Whoa. Catching air like I hit a floated Buddha. Whoa. Move chick out the way like I'm Luda. Whoa. I'm making moves like I'm doing Kama Sutra. Whoa. Doing Kama Sutra. Whoa. Move chick out the way like I'm Luda. Whoa. Doing Kama Sutra. Whoa. Move chick out the way like I'm Luda. Hold up. I fell in love with you 'cause you made me fail. Hey. I fell in love with you 'cause you kept it real. Hey. Then you done changed up on me. You changed your flow. Now I've been.
You are too concerned with what was and what will be. There's a saying, yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, but today is a gift. That is why it is called the present.
Same thing. She would drop it in the world's simplest maze. Works the same way every single time. Click, a partition would move, the rat's free to run through the maze and find the chocolate. Every rat, when you drop it in the maze the first time, acts like the world's laziest animal. It'll like wander up and down, it'll get to the end, it'll see the chocolate, it'll go the other direction. It takes on average about 13 minutes for it to find the chocolate. And for years, people thought that this is because rats are unusually dumb, and that if a rat can learn something, then any animal could learn it. But Dr. Graybill could actually see inside the rat's head, and what she saw was kind of fascinating. This is a simplified neurological graph the first time a rat's dropped in this maze. There's all these spikes in activity, right? Basically, the rat would like scratch the walls and the scratching centers of its brain would light up, or it'd find the chocolate and the pleasure centers would light up. This is what unmediated learning looks like. So Dr. Graybill takes this rat, she drops each of them in the maze again and again, 150 times each. Over time, unsurprisingly, the rat learns how to run through the maze faster and faster and faster to find the chocolate. But what's really interesting is what happens inside its head. As the rat learns to run faster and faster, as finding the chocolate becomes more of an automatic habit, the rat starts thinking less and less and less. This graph on the bottom is a simplified neurological graph of the 150th iteration through that maze. What you'll notice is this deep valley there, right? That's the same valley you would see if the rat went to sleep. Now, all of us have habits, right? There's a researcher named Wendy Wood who followed around a couple thousand people to see how much of our daily behaviors are habits. And what she found is about 40 to 45% of the decisions we make actually every day aren't actually decisions, they're habits. And if somehow I could get 150 sensors into your head, this is exactly what I would see. Remember waking up in the morning and walking in the subway, and now you're at your desk, but you don't remember what happened in the middle? This is what's happening. Your brain is kind of turning off. At the beginning of the habit, when the rat would hear the click, there'd be this burst of activity, and then essentially the brain would power down. And then at the end, when it found the chocolate, it's as if the rat would sort of shake itself awake again and notice what was going on. Within neurology, this is such an important idea and finding that it's become known as the habit loop. And what it says is that every habit has three components. There's a cue, which is like an automatic trigger for a behavior to start. And then a routine, which is the behavior itself. And then finally, a reward that helps your brain remember that pattern for the future. Every habit has cues and rewards. And for years, everyone from Aristotle to Oprah, when they've talked about habits, they've focused on the routine, on the behavior. But what we've learned in the last decade is that it's the cue and the reward that influence how habits function. Look, this is what I want you to do. Choose a cue, like always put your running shoes next to your bed, or go running with the same group of friends. And then when you get back from working out, give yourself a small piece of chocolate. Right? This is counterintuitive because not many people exercise in order to eat chocolate, or at least not quite that directly. And yet what the researchers suspected is that even though all of you think that you want to exercise, your brain thinks you're a liar and that you hate exercise. And the only way that I can trick you in exercise is to give yourself a reward you genuinely enjoy, like a small piece of chocolate. 6 months after they did this, they found that 58% of those people were more likely to be exercising, and they had stopped eating the chocolate.
So feelings are signals, and that's what they are. Now, the way these basic signals work is as follows. All kinds of creatures have a tripartite motivational system, and that is pleasure-seeking, pain avoidance, and energy conservation.
Biological mechanisms that nature has designed into every creature on Earth so they can survive to pass their genes on to the next generation. The first leg of the motivational triad is pleasure-seeking.
And primarily two things are the cause of that, and those two things are food and sex. So in the case of a great white shark, it's basically got a neon sign flashing across its forehead saying food, sex, food, sex, food, sex. Unless it's a male, then it says sex, food, but it's pretty much the same thing.
The other two legs of the motivational triad are avoiding pain and doing everything with the least amount of effort.
Pleasure-seeking, pain avoidance, and energy conservation, that really sums up animal behavior, whether we're talking about a paramecium under a microscope or a great white shark.
We're going to put him in a cage. In this cage, there's going to be two buttons. And the blue button is going to be a regular old button that if he hits it, a door is going to open. He's going to be able to fly out into an aviary and start killing bugs and putting them on thorns. But the red button is going to be a magic button. And if he hits this button, there's going to be a trap door inside of this cage. And in it is going to be, through that trap door is going to be a female coming into the cage, all ready to rock and roll. Now, I want you to think hard about which button this guy's going to be pushing. But now we're going to put him back in the cage, and we're going to change things up just a little bit. Now the blue button is going to be the female, and the red button is going to be the magic button, where we're going to put a little glass pipe in his head, and we're going to drive it right down into the pleasure centers of his brain. And we're going to put in that glass pipe cocaine. And every time he hits that red button, it's going to activate the pleasure centers by flooding those centers with dopamine. And dopamine is the main chemical that causes him to have an excited euphoria that we call pleasure. Now, let's think about which one he's going to do. We know that he's going to hit the red button, and the reason why is because he's going to save energy in the process. In fact, if we keep putting cocaine in that, he's going to keep hitting that button so often that even if he gets hungry and even if he gets thirsty and very tired, and even if there's females in the cage, he won't even look at her. What he's going to do is keep hitting that red button, and in about 10 to 12 days, he'll be dead.
This starts with a range of receptors in our stomachs that help us gauge how much food we've eaten. These include stretch receptors to help measure the sheer volume of food in our stomachs. We also have density receptors to help determine the caloric density, or what we more commonly call the richness of our food. For instance, 500 calories of natural plant food fills the stomach completely, triggering both our stretch and density receptors to signal our brain that we've had enough to eat. But 500 calories of unnaturally rich or processed food fills the stomach far less, deceiving these receptors into telling our brain that we need to eat more. Even worse is 500 calories of oil, which is almost pure fat and barely triggers any response at all.
The problem with weight management in humans is that if you make these foods completely artificial, which we do today, you wind up with a problem that people have to overeat just to be satisfied.
We do. However, in phase 2, if you introduce junk food, all the foods that people really love, if you introduce those foods, what's going to happen is there's going to be a lift in the dopamine circuitry. Because that food is richer, there's more calories per bite. When you start at stage 1 and go to stage 2, when you do the wrong thing, it feels right. And when you're at stage 3 and you go to stage 4, you do the correct thing and it feels wrong.
The instinct in you is telling you to seek the most pleasure for the least pain and the least effort. But when you do that in the modern environment, you're taking in cues that are fooling the system and pulling us right into what we call the pleasure trap. Now, how do we get out of this? What we do is we go through stage 4 to stage 5. That's essentially recovery. And if we do that, we get more and more sensitive. The food tastes better. The problem is that takes several weeks to accomplish that, and that's a several-week journey
that very few people will ever make.